Good evening, hello and welcome. You're watching The Right Stand here on CNN News 18 with me, Poonam Burde. Before we get into the big debate tonight, let me take you through some of the highlights of the day. Prime Minister Narendra Modi chaired a high-level meeting today to review the preparedness of India's Gaganyaan mission. He also outlined the future of India's space exploration endeavours. The Prime Minister directed that India should now aim for new and ambitious goals, including setting up the Indian space station by 2035 and sending the first Indian to space by 2040. Prime Minister Modi inaugurated the third edition of the Global Maritime India Summit in Mumbai today via video conferencing. The summit will discuss and deliberate key issues as far as maritime sector is concerned. Prime Minister Modi also launched maritime projects worth 23,000 crore rupees that are aligned with the Amrit Kal vision of this government 2047. He also laid out the vision for the blue economy. It outlines strategic initiatives aimed at enhancing port facilities, promoting sustainable practices and facilitating international collaboration. The Chhatrapati Sambhajinagar District Administration has issued over 1 lakh golden cards under the Ayushman Bharat Health Insurance Scheme in just the last 10 days. The district administration reveals that they have achieved the 50% target now. The target set is 5.7 lakh beneficiaries, out of which 2.35 have already been handed over these cards. Now, let's take you through the big diplomacy debate here on The Right Stand.
Wednesday, President Biden will visit Israel. He's coming here at a critical moment for Israel, for the region, and for the world.
Now, in Israel's war against Hamas and terror, we've seen many turning points in the last 10 days. Today is 11th day of the conflict. Some of them on the battlefield, while some others took place in the wings. Geopolitical moves were made in the background, but they too are equally important in the bigger scheme of things. The goal at the moment is to end the war, to limit the casualties and to counter losses. But as far as the long-term goal is concerned and the bigger picture is concerned, is what many countries seem to now be eyeing. And that really is the geopolitical shift. And that's what we're going to be talking about, and that's what we're going to be focusing on as far as tonight's Right Stand is concerned. World leaders are making a beeline to the conflict zone, stressing on their support for Israel. Anthony Blinken returned to Israel to take stock. Secretary of Defense of the United States, Lloyd Austin, was in Tel Aviv not too long ago, and tomorrow the US President himself is going to be there. On the other side, you have a new coalition that seems to be taking shape, or let me put it this way, an old coalition that is opening up a new front. Russian President Vladimir Putin flew to Beijing this morning to meet his strongest, most crucial ally, as he says, the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Bonded by a no-limits partnership that they signed just last year, both leaders are hoping to make most of the war in West Asia. Perhaps that's why, despite years of favorable foreign policy towards Israel, now we see both Beijing and Moscow openly be hostile to Israel. Before we get into the geopolitical ramifications, let me first get you a sense of what really the war looks like today. Today is day 11, and here's what the status of the conflict is. The war rages. Israel is bombarding the northern Gaza Strip. 6 top Hamas operatives have already been killed in the strike. Just a few hours ago, in fact, we also gathered that the commander of the Central Brigade of Hamas was also killed in an Israeli airstrike. The airstrikes are targeting Hezbollah targets on the Lebanon border as well. So it's both fronts really that the war is currently on, both the southern and the northern border. As far as Hamas is concerned, nearly 200 have been held captive in Gaza, is what the Israeli air defense forces have been confirming to us. But that's not all, because the human impact of this is really large. We've seen people being displaced, we've seen loss of lives and casualties that are only going up with each passing day. In Israel, over 1,400 people have been killed, over 3,500 are injured. As far as Gaza Strip is concerned, over 2,800 have been killed, over 10,000 have been wounded. Many have been evacuated, but unfortunately some not in time. As far as West Bank is concerned, 57 have been killed at last count. Over 1,200 have been injured. So how is the world stacked up as far as this conflict goes? It's the West, the US and its allies versus the Russia-China-Iran axis, and both sides are making their stance very clear. Not just with public statements, but also with public appearances. Joe Biden prepares to land in Tel Aviv. China, at the same time, rolled out the red carpet this morning to the Russian President Vladimir Putin, who's there to attend the BRI summit, but Israel, of course, features prominently. While the US bolsters Israel's defense with military aid, Putin has warned Benjamin Netanyahu against any further escalation, going on to say that Putin is ready to play the mediator and to end this crisis. How that offer goes, we'll have to wait and watch. But let's take a look at how the West is standing by, and France is one of those countries that has been very, very vocal as far as its support to Israel is concerned. Reports suggest French President Emmanuel Macron could be flying to Israel soon to show solidarity. On the other side, you have Xi Jinping and his administration that is conspicuous by its silence as far as Hamas is concerned. In fact, the special envoy of China to the Middle East is going to be in the region this week. He is going to be not just in the Middle East, he's going to be talking of a lot of issues as far as China and its ambitions in West Asia are concerned. Now, Israel is preparing for a complete onslaught on Gaza. The ground offensive is being prepared. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, in fact, has set foot in Tel Aviv just a few minutes ago. On the other side, in the wake of this ground offensive, Iran has shot off a warning to Israel. While Olaf Scholz maintained that it's important for him to address the practical questions and prevent an escalation in Europe, Iran has come out and slammed Israel for its crimes against Palestinians that reside in Gaza. There is a lot at stake, though, as far as both Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin go. Both of them are, unfortunately, by their own mistakes, hobbled in their own crisis, many of which we now believe is why they are sensing an opportunity in this conflict that comes in from West Asia. The renewed American focus on the Israel-Hamas conflict is seen as a blessing by many. That's what analysts believe, that as far as China and Russia are concerned, they sense an opportunity. Why? Because America is being hard-pressed on multiple fronts. It opens the door for this axis, for this anti-West coalition to shape the narrative. Putin and Xi meet at the same time as US President Joe Biden, like I mentioned, is traveling to Israel. The Beijing meeting is expected to emphasize their shared vision for a new world order which no longer is dominated by the United States or its allies. Both Beijing and Moscow have criticized Israel's action and called for a ceasefire. It comes as no surprise that in the first response to this conflict, Vladimir Putin in fact came out and blamed the United States and its failure of its West Asia policy. That's the kind of narrative that both the countries want to shape. Now, it's been almost 2 years since the Ukraine war. Putin is feeling the heat even now as far as sanctions are concerned. Even his travel is extremely limited. Many believe that Israel-Hamas conflict gives Putin the chance to shift the spotlight away from the Ukraine war. He's also looking for support for the conflict which he finds in China. China, meanwhile, needs the Arab world for several reasons. One being the country's dependence on West Asia for its oil. Maintaining friendly ties with the Islamic world entails support to the Palestinians, which is also why we've perhaps seen that shift, or why we haven't heard one word from anyone within the Chinese administration as far as Hamas and its terror is concerned. Analysts also believe that China is trying to offset concerns in the Islamic countries about its treatment of Uyghur Muslims in the Xinjiang province. So this way, while lending support to Palestine and the Palestinians, perhaps Beijing believes that they can try and take the spotlight off the Xinjiang province and the Uyghur Muslims there. Beijing's one big goal is also to extend its influence in the West Asia region because of the Belt and Road Initiative that's at stake, given at a time when the economy in China is feeling the heat. Both China and Russia have their eye on expanding into the Middle East in other capacities as well. As far as BRICS is concerned, as far as the SCO goes, they want to cultivate countries in the region, and what better opportunity is perhaps what both of them believe. The ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict could potentially impact the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor project as well. Let me tell you why. Now, this is a project that was signed just a few months ago during the G20 summit here in India. As far as ports in Israel are concerned, this is what at stake. Those are the 5 ports where this project is expected to be. They are very, very critical for this project, and as far as the conflict continues there, the talk of this is going to be limited. Arab nations backing Gaza and against Israel strikes is also something that India wants to be on its side. How that fits into this entire scheme of things needs to be looked into. It's difficult to build trust between Israel and Arab nations at the moment because many of them have come out and not defended Israel as far as its onslaught against a terror group like Hamas is concerned. Hamas's support from the Iranian side, Iran actually wanting to talk about retribution as far as Palestine goes, that may divide the Middle East as well, and the trade route could unfortunately come in the way of that. That's a worry many are now raising. China, on the other hand, prepares for the Belt and Road Summit in the shadow of this war. Lot is at stake for Beijing as well. Like I said, their economy is on shaky grounds, which is why the Belt and Road Initiative and its progress is extremely important to China. Russia, China, Central Asia, West Asia is one of the routes that the BRI plans that it envisages. If Israel conflict rages and it drags on like we've seen the Russia-Ukraine war, it will impact the BRI project. Middle East nations like Turkey have shown interest in BRI. China also aims to mainstream the Taliban through this project. So there's multiple reasons why it is important for China and Russia to try and keep this narrative up of what we're seeing in the Midwest, what we're seeing in West Asia is all because of United States, its allies and its failed policy. They've used it as per their convenience is an argument many who back China and Russia make. So what are these war games that we're now seeing? One bloc versus another in the shadows of the conflict that plays out on ground. Are these war games being played to try and shift balance? And if yes, will they be successful? That's the big debate tonight.
Hello, Moto.
Let me open this up to the panelists that join us here on this debate. Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow of the ORF, joins us on this broadcast. Adam Scott Bellows, CEO of the Israel Innovation Fund. Ben Aris, Editor-in-Chief of BNE and former Moscow Bureau Chief, also joins us here on this broadcast. Peter Kuznick, Director of Nuclear Studies Institute, American University, also joins us here on this broadcast. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here on this broadcast with your perspective. I want to begin by asking Ben Aris. We've seen Vladimir Putin this morning land in China. We've seen the kind of relationship that the two of them share. It's a no-limits partnership, as they've put it not too long ago. Are they sensing an opportunity for their own good as far as the Israel-Hamas war is concerned?
I think certainly the war that's broken out in the Middle East around Israel is an opportunity, particularly for Russia, simply because it distracts the world's attention from the fight in Ukraine. And in recent months, we've seen that some Ukrainian fatigue building up here. The war's been dragging on for nearly 2 years now, and the Ukrainians are under pressure. They're running out of ammo, they're running out of money. There was a problem trying to get the last funding package through Congress, and so that got frozen. And so they're under a lot of pressure. And Zelensky's strategy has been to keep his war on the front page. And he's done that very successfully. He's emerged something as a hero, as an iconic figure, a wartime resistor. But that's stopped now. It's the focus switches to the Middle East. And that's going to be a big problem. And I think Putin, he doesn't have to do much here. That Lavrov, the foreign minister, has come out immediately to say that there should be a ceasefire. And moreover, they've been saying, like, all the rules that you've been saying that we've been breaking, you know, the Israelis have been breaking, disproportionate force, targeting civilian buildings, lots of civilian casualties. And so all of that's making the West look a bit hypocritical. And Lavrov has been playing for that. And moreover, Russia has been investing into the Middle East heavily in recent years to build up its relations there. And it's in a fairly unique position where it's friends with, you know, Tehran and Syria at the same time, and the Saudis. It's a member of OPEC now, which it hasn't been for a while. And so it's got a lot at stake here. And it's the Arab nations, I think, are looking to it as seeing as a real player in the region, whereas at the same time, the American influence in the Middle East has dwindled to some extent ever since it became an oil exporter itself. Although, of course, it remains heavily invested into Israel. And that's the nub of it, that I think the Russians are going to be playing on that, their relations with the other countries in the region to push through their advantage and to hopefully distract everyone from the war in Ukraine.
So if anything substantial comes out of it or not, at least for the optics of it, it definitely bears well as far as Russia is concerned. That's really what Russia seems to be going after. But I want to get in Peter Kuznick as well. And the hypocrisy of the West is something that is being spoken of. That is also something that both Russia and China want to harp about that this really is US's failure, its policy in West Asia's failure, which is to blame.
There's so much blame to go around. I mean, this is collective blame. We've ignored the Palestinian problem for years now. And the conditions that the Palestinians have been living in have been intolerable. And the kind of discrimination, the oppression breeds hatred. And we're seeing the results of that hatred. The United States has not put pressure on Israel to resolve the Palestinian problem. We're further away from a two-state solution now than we've been in years. And the Netanyahu government has encouraged the settlers in the West Bank. And part of the failure of security was his shifting the troops away from the Gaza border to the West Bank in order to protect those settlers. So, and that does not in any way justify Hamas. What Hamas did was barbaric. This cannot be condoned by anybody. And so we were in a very difficult situation where Israel now is poised to carry out an invasion of Gaza that is going to not only discredit Israel even more in the eyes of the world and isolate Israel, it's going to create a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. So I mean, that's not Israel. It's not in Israel's interest to carry this out, and it's going to breed more terrorism in the future. So, but there's not a good solution, and there hasn't been a good solution for a while. But the world has not been focused on this and putting pressure on all sides to come to some agreement that would represent the interests of the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Right, but many argue, many analysts also say that it's really the moot point, the issue at hand that was glossed over by the West for far too long, which is why we're in this situation that we're at. And I want to get an Adam Bellows as well on this broadcast. The US's response over the span of the last 10 days has been floppy, has been wishy-washy, is what some would also suggest. Would you agree with that? Yes, on one hand, they are fortifying your defenses. They are giving you that kind of military aid. But on the other hand, we now have Joe Biden also talking about the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian people. Adam Scott Bellows? I believe you've muted yourself, sir. If you could just go ahead.
I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Like I really enjoyed the left-wing talking points and throwing the majority of the start of this conflict on Israel. But we'll go back to that in a second. We can handle the American foreign policy. American foreign policy has been wishy-washy since the start of the Obama administration, and the idea of leading from behind and empowering Iran through trying to build them back up economically and bring them back into the world diplomatically. It's no surprise that we see China and Russia coming together. That's an obvious thing. Anybody reading the geopolitical landscape in the last 10 years could see that coming through, especially with China's Silk Road policy and Russia being so embedded in Syria. But the most important thing right now is the American stance and NATO's response and the countries that are involved in the Abraham Accords, which is basically the new NATO of the Middle East. So let's just be completely honest here. The Americans know that they've messed up. They know they've been wishy-washy. They've been trying to play both sides of the aisle, both diplomatically and strengthening Israel by helping it keep its QME, its qualitative military edge. It's very important for us to understand that this new axis of evil, China, Russia, and Iran, are the three greatest human rights violators of the 21st century. So when we're talking about who this war is against, in terms of the sides, you're looking at Europe, America, and the Abraham Accords countries. So I don't really see how nitpicking things of the past, and not only that, the failed foreign policy of trying to create a two-state solution and forcing a Western version of peacemaking in the Middle East gets us anywhere. It's been very clear that the only way to make peace in the Middle East is through strength, and it is from Israel having the qualitative military edge that it is allowed to build over the last 75 years because of its relationships with the Western world, that it's been able to at least defend itself as well as it has been and develop things like the Iron Dome. So to be honest, if you look at what is going on with China right now and Russia, it is a complete response to try to discredit American and Western efforts to create legitimate peace. Look at what China and Russia are saying right now. They're talking about a two-state solution constantly, but everybody knows that China and Russia would never conduct any type of peace treaties on their own territory like that. They would never agree to split anything because everybody knows that that's not actually how you make peace. You have to make peace with your enemies. You don't make peace with your friends. I truly do think it's a huge disappointment for us to be trying to explain Palestinian frustration as a result of the barbary that we've seen 11 days ago. The majority of the Palestinian people want to have peace with Israel. They want to be able to put food on the table. So I really do think that, let's just be honest, the new axis of evil, just like World War II, is being formed. It's with the three greatest human rights violators of the last century, if not before. And the reality is what the reality is. It doesn't take that much to understand this, in my opinion. It's very clear.
And Sushant Sareen, like Mr. Bellows, many would also suggest that it's hypocritical that China and Russia, of all the countries, want to play the peacemaker as far as this is concerned. We have both those leaders coming out and try and make an offer of negotiating peace. We had a similar offer come to the fore from the Chinese side and from Xi Jinping during the Ukraine-Russia war. And we've seen where that has gone and what has come out of it.
So Poonam, I don't want to be cynical. I know I'll sound cynical, but this is realism. All foreign policy is hypocritical. And I think the Russians and Chinese are doing the right thing. The problem is that the West has forgotten that foreign policy is based on hypocrisy. You might be espousing a higher ideal, but then you have to deal with the world as it is. And has the West started dealing with the world as it is? Quite to the contrary. When they were dealing with the world, the way the world was, the West was the undisputed leader. Today, who takes the West seriously, really? Let's come down to it. Yeah, it's probably still the most powerful entity, but who takes it so seriously anymore? Somebody was just saying that put pressure on all sides. Which side? Which is the protagonist out here? One is the state of Israel, which is literally fighting for its survival. The other is Hamas. You think you can put pressure on Hamas? That's like saying put pressure on Al-Qaeda or put pressure on ISIS. There is no, that's a death cult you are dealing with. Put pressure on Hezbollah. Best of luck with that. You can't do that, right? Two-state solution. It's been debated. It's been tried. And all the fault a lot of fault does lie with Israel, but a lot of fault also lies with the Palestinian negotiators. When they were getting deals, they wanted much more than what was on the table, and what was on the table, they could have gone with it and then maybe, moved ahead and sought something more. That would have reassured Israel. It would have probably brought in a greater amount of peace out there. Then you have the problem with when American foreign policy is based not on realism but on virtue signaling. They literally ignored the Middle East. They thought Middle East was no longer important because the great big challenge was now going to be China. Then they got involved in a needless war in Ukraine because they pushed the Russians. And I know a lot of people will push back against me, but you unnecessarily provoked the Russians. You created a situation where the Russians did what they did in Ukraine, and I'm certainly not a defender of the Russians and what they did, but that's the way it happened. They moved in out there and you were constantly needling them needlessly when you knew that your big challenge was from China. But on China, you had starry-eyed notions that, they will ultimately become a country like us. I don't know where that thinking was coming from, but that is what the thinking was until they got a rude awakening. Now they are saying that we want to fight against China and it's going to be a global competition because, like it or not, China is a global power. And what you did was that a very critical area of geopolitics, which is the Middle East, you took your eyes off the ball. Maybe MBS did what he did. Did you need to go after him the way you went after him? Middle East is a nasty place, right? You have to learn to deal with things.
Sure.
You went after him. You've ruined your relationship with Saudi Arabia. You ruined your relationship with Saudi Arabia also when you started reaching out to Iran without giving the necessary guarantees to Saudi Arabia. The Chinese saw a vacuum of sorts developing and they started moving in. They've become a player in the Middle East. The Russians moved in when all hell broke loose in Syria. They have become, their global footprint has extended to the Middle East much more than what it was in the past. So I think to some extent it is it's a combination of bad policies, it's a combination of virtue signaling, and then it's a combination of how the West is handling problems on its own streets. Now the Western governments, for example, might say whatever they are saying, and I think they're right when they support Israel, its right to survival, and they are unequivocal in condemning what has happened in Israel, right?
Yes.
And to some extent Israel is justified, because how else do you clean this up? You can't say that, look, there is going to be casualty. Of course there will be, but what is the choice before Israel? That you let Hamas stay intact? No, that's not a choice before them. But there are no good choices for them. But the problem is that the governments might say what they will, but they have a problem on their own streets. Their own universities have gone so woke that they're actually using the Palestine, the support for Palestine or a two-state solution to actually, in a sense, justify what Hamas did. And this is happening on streets of Western countries, and there is nothing they can do about it. So I wonder whether the West really has got its act together. I don't know. I'm kind of skeptical about how they're going to be able to manage this.
And Peter Kuznick, we've Sushant was also pointing out what happened last Saturday, what the kind of terror that was unleashed. It's terror. There are no two ways of looking at it, which is also why we've seen the West come out and say that Israel has the right to defend itself. But then we also had a cautionary tale coming in from Joe Biden a few days ago, saying it would be a big mistake if Israel decides to go ahead and occupy Gaza in the long term. So there's a lot of missteps perhaps in the past that are leading to changes in the kind of stance the United States is taking. But is this sending a mixed signal, something that perhaps would set the stage for a bigger crisis in the future?
As a historian, we have to understand these things in context. And clearly there are mixed signals here. Because on the one hand, there's the right to self-defense, and there 1,400 Israelis were murdered callously, brutally by Hamas. But then we saw, for example, with the U.S. response to 9/11, the U.S. lashed out in anger and outrage and moral indignation, but it lashed out stupidly. It was not in the U.S. interest or the world's interest. And the U.S. diminished its stature, its influence, and created a situation in which hundreds of thousands, perhaps more than 1 million people were killed and achieved next to nothing in the process. I don't want to see Israel make the same kind of mistake right now.
Sure.
And I think
it's
that
ridiculous.
To you it's ridiculous, but to you it's ridiculous, but to the people in the world it's not ridiculous.
You're comparing the response, the Israeli response, to 1,300 people killed in the streets and 40 babies being beheaded on our territory, okay, to the response of 9/11? Are you serious right now? Do you not realize the difference of restraint that we have had compared to that? We're not going and invading two countries. We're literally defending the borders of this country on two different fronts. We're fighting two radical Islamist extremist cells. How is this any different from ISIS? Just explain that to me. I don't even know what there is to defend. It's not. This has nothing to do with Palestinian national resistance.
You are creating
excuse me.
false
Excuse
narrative.
me. Excuse
I am
me.
not
I'm sorry. No.
I
I'm sorry.
Hamas.
The only reason why we are in this conflict right now is because radical Islam has embedded itself into the Palestinian national resistance movement for almost 100 years. And every time it expresses itself in violence, it has set the Palestinian people back. It has nothing to do with the conditions. It started way before 1948. It started way before the occupation. This has been something that has been nurtured and grown by the world. Okay, and by supporting things like UNRWA that have been teaching and radicalizing generations of Palestinians, of young Palestinians. It is absolutely ridiculous to ever make that type of comparison. And now, excuse me, I'm not done. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not done. Okay, it is absolutely ridiculous to make that comparison. And not only that, okay, the idea that we are not doing right now, that the Israeli army is not doing every single thing they can to prevent a humanitarian crisis in Gaza right now, considering that they have asked over 1 million people to relocate or leave, and Egypt has closed their side of the border, not letting them into Sinai. In addition to that, we know for a fact from intelligence reports that Hamas is preventing a majority of the civilians from leaving. Do not ever equate human value or human rights to the way that we treat life versus the way that Hamas or any other radical Islamic terror cell has ever shown to treat human life. It is absolutely ridiculous. It is completely absurd, and it is totally immoral. You could say that I apologize, but I can't believe that you would even begin to start this type of comparison into how our government is going, our army, our country right now is going to be diminished in the world if we send a ground invasion. We don't want to send a ground invasion. We don't want to endanger the lives of Israeli troops. We do not want that at all. We want to be able to aerial bombard Gaza and have as many civilians leave the Gaza Strip as possible. So it is absolutely ridiculous to create some type of moral equivalence even to begin with, or as if the IDF has not completely acted with restraint, given Israel's capabilities and the fact that we have not leveled the Gaza Strip once since 2005, since the very first rocket was fired. I'm sorry. But we operate very differently in the Middle East compared to the United States of America. We've been trying to tell the United States of America how to act. There's a reason why Netanyahu had to come to Congress and give that speech to tell people not to go into the Iranian nuclear deal, to the JCPOA. It's what gave birth to the Abraham Accords. It was what was being put in place to prevent exactly what we are in now.
And would these mistakes be repeated? That's really what the big argument is. Are we now seeing one bloc versus the other, and in a bid to outdo the other, or espousing the dream to do that, are we pushing both Israel and everybody else around them, the Middle East, into that kind of vacuum that has created this crisis in the first place? Well, Peter Kuznick, you were making a point. Go ahead. I have two other panelists waiting as well. Quick 30-second rebuttal, sir.
Adam and I see the world very, very differently. And I think that what Israel's doing is a mistake for Israel, a mistake for the Palestinians, and it's going to pay a big price. I don't want to see that happen. I want to see this resolved peacefully if it's at all possible. I hate Hamas. I want to see Hamas eliminated from the leadership there. They're not in the interests of the Palestinian people, certainly not in the interests of Gaza. But I think what Israel is on the doorstep of doing now is not in the interests of anybody. And Adam says they're being so careful with the bombing. That's not the way the world sees it.
Sure.
The world sees it as a humanitarian crisis already.
Sure.
But not only that, they've dropped more bombs. The Israelis have dropped more bombs in 10 days than the U.S. did on Afghanistan in the height of the bombing in Afghanistan. And they've been already 3,000 civilians dead there, babies dead there.
So I'm not sure if that's the right comparison to make, and let's not really derail what we're talking about here. But as far as the Western policy is concerned and Israel's right to defend is concerned, the West has unequivocally come out and defended that. But I want to get in Ben Aris and Sushant Sareen as well before I wrap this up. Ben Aris, I want to ask you this. Russia now espouses, along with China and all its other friends and allies, to try and shift the narrative of how this is a failure of the US and its allies. Is that dream, is that vision easier said than done?
Putin has been working very hard to sell what he sees as a multipolar world as opposed to the unipolar, whereby that's led by the Americans. And I think in this year, in the last rounds of the BRIC expansion and then the G20, we've seen that a lot of people in the global south, while they don't necessarily subscribe to Putin's view of a conflict, they do feel that they're the underdogs and they want to step up and have their voice said. India did a very good job at the G20, bringing in the Africans, and the amount of support that Russia is found in Africa and the Middle East as well has been remarkable. And so we're seeing here, I think, more of the same, in so much as Putin and Xi Jinping are sort of kept out of this, but they're trying to be seen as peacemakers. But they're playing not just the West here, they're playing to the global South, to be seen as like the sensible people that you can go to when you have a problem like this. And so in that sense, they'll get a lot of capital out of this amongst the audience that they're playing to, the global South.
Sure. So, Shansareen, then should India be wary of these two blocs that are forming and the kind of geopolitical changes that we're seeing, or at least that these parties are attempting to see?
Of course, we need to be very wary, and I think we are also going to get caught in between both these blocs because our interests lie with the West, but we also have interests with Russia, for example. Not, I wouldn't say so much with the Chinese. We have more of a threat with the Chinese, but certainly with Russia. And it's certainly not in India's interest to see the Russia-China axis become stronger. In fact, that is one of the reasons why we want to keep up with Russia, because it creates a problem in our region. But I think, Poonam, it's very important to push back a little bit against what Professor Kuznick was saying. Look, the strategic myopia of the West is astounding. Right? They suddenly declared that the war on terror is over, as though terrorism was a thing of the past, and that now the war is only going to be with China and, you know, the big wars. Of course, the big contestation is going to be there. That is certainly a case. But that does not mean that these smaller theaters are all gone. That all these bad guys running around with guns in the entire sub-Saharan Africa or in the Middle East or even in South Asia have suddenly disappeared and suddenly become nice guys who do nothing but read religious texts. That's not the case. Yeah. These are cold-blooded killers. But when the United States went into Afghanistan, that was the right thing to do. Whether they dropped as much, bombs or not, that's not important, because there was nothing in Afghanistan to really bomb, right? They didn't have tunnels and they didn't have all sorts of other contraptions which the Hamas has built in Gaza. But the Americans did the right thing by going into Afghanistan. Where they messed up big time was to go into Iraq after having gone into Afghanistan. They should have cleaned up Afghanistan. There was no resistance. The intervention was popular. The entire world was out there. And then suddenly this madness took the Americans over, and they decided that they're going to go into Iraq. And they lost sight of the ball, and then they prosecuted the war wrong. Their allies were their biggest enemies, Pakistan.
Yes.
They depended on these goddamn Pakistanis, and they thought they'll win the war by talking to the Pakistanis. I mean, that's like saying that, okay, fine, let me make an alliance with Iran to get rid of Hezbollah. Good luck with that. That's not going to happen, right? So it's, this kind of strategic myopia. And what I always say about, the West, that their scholarship is great, but they have learned nothing.
I really hope that it's not the people of Israel, it's not the people of the region that become collateral damage or casualties of these two blocs trying to outdo each other and with these geopolitical maneuvers. But I have to leave it at that. I thank you all, gentlemen, for joining us here on this broadcast with your perspective. It is a time for a quick break here on this edition of The Right Stand. But on the other side, we're going to get you the big debate of whether India is ready or not for gay marriage.
Hello, Moto.
This attack by Hamas people. We are joined by Erith, and she will explain the kind of situation that is currently in city. Okay, so first to just give you some idea, we are still standing on the splattered blood remains, and this is a safe house that was probably also attacked, and many people were dragged out of this house and killed summarily. So Erith, how would you describe the situation in the city currently?
So right now we have about 4,000 to 5,000 people that stayed in the city. The rest of them have been evacuated, and they're living either with family outside of Sderot or in hotels. the government and the city, really, the city is providing for them, making sure that they have everything that they need, from mental health support to clothing and food and provisions and anything that they need. And right now we're trying to take care of also, we have people on the ground from the municipality in every hotel and trying to see if there are any needs that come up, and whatever people need, we're taking care of.
So we know that on 7th of October there was total rampage and mayhem that was done by the terrorists.
Right.
I mean, if you could describe how the situation in the town on that day, how did it all
So what
all
happened
start?
that day?
Yes,
So really, at 6 o'clock in the morning, sirens went off, and when sirens go off, people here know to go into the shelters. Because it was a holiday, people were supposed to be walking, to synagogues that morning, and it's a Saturday. But because of the sirens, people weren't on the streets, thankfully, because the minute that happened, we had a few jeeps. I do not know if it was 3 or 4 jeeps, heavily equipped with military and equipment, guns, explosives, you name it. And they just went through town, through the main street, and then they separated into a few streets. One of them came to the police station that we see the remainings of right here, and they took over the police station, and the rest of them were just going around town and killing anyone that they could. Anyone. People were shot in their cars. There was a minibus here with people that were going on a trip for the day. They shot all of them, all 13 people in the cars. They were just running around trying to kill people as they go. The police, the minute the police was able to do something, they did. The minute our security team, the minute they heard anything, gunshots, whatever that was, they put their gear on and they went to the streets to actually look for these terrorists and to have some kind of a face-to-face with them so they can finish them off. But it was brutal. They came very prepared. They knew exactly what they were doing. And the minute they got a hold of the police station, they got the higher ground, and there was a sniper or 2 snipers on the top of the building, and they were really killing anybody around you. Now you can see this is a populated area, so people were stuck in their homes.
Elith, how many hours it took the security forces actually before they could take control of the city entirely?
So it took a long time, because you have to understand the army was surprised as well, and the army was on fighting the front line of the kibbutzim and the moshavim right there. So really in Sderot, by the time we got the help and by the time we got a hold of the situation, roughly 36 hours, which is a very long time to be home and scared. I got a lot of calls from people calling me and saying there are gunshots by my window, there are gunshots in the streets, not knowing if it's soldiers or if it's Hamas. So it was very, very scary.
With the kind of city and the situation, how soon do you think the city can go back to normal, people can come back and they will live?
Welcome back. You're watching The Right Stand. The Supreme Court today, the bench led by Chief Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, refused to recognize same-sex marriage as a fundamental right. The 5-judge bench believed that any reading of words into the Special Marriage Act would be tantamount to incursions into legislative domain. In a 3-2 judgment, the Supreme Court also denied adoption rights to the community. Supreme Court put the onus on the Parliament and said it is for them to change the law, it is for them to make the law, it's only for the courts to interpret it. The 5-judge bench gave 4 judgments with different positions. It was a 3 versus 2, like I just pointed out. Let's take a look at what the majority opinion was and what the minority opinion was. They did concur on certain aspects. One, of course, the majority opinion was that no right to marriage is fundamental. It's not a fundamental right, is what the majority opinion was. The minority opinion also concurred as far as the right to marriage is concerned. The majority opinion was that no rights to civil union, it can only be through laws. But the minority opinion of the 2 judges, including the Chief Justice, was that civil union should be permissible. It can be permissible in India. The majority opinion of this particular bench was that adoption of children cannot be granted to the LGBTQI community. The opinion of the minority bench was that they could have the right to adopt children and that the CARA regulation could be struck down. The majority opinion in this case was that the community has the right to choose their own party. What the minority argument was that the transgender persons have right to marry. So there were differing opinions as far as the 3 versus 2 judgment of the Supreme Court was concerned. And let me open this up to the panelists that join us here on this broadcast. Abhijit Iyer Mitra, Senior Fellow of the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, joins us. An RSS thinker, Ratan Sharda, joins us on this broadcast as well. And Abhijit Iyer Mitra, I want to begin by asking you, you've seen this legal hurdle, this legal fight up close and personal. From today's verdict, do you think you're back to square one, or do you believe there is a situation of win some, lose some?
No, I don't think we're back to square one. I think the main thing here is, if and when the government, and we've been led to believe the government is bringing in some kind of a uniform civil code, that will have to include it, because you can't have two legislations for the same thing. So if and when the government does introduce that, I certainly will be petitioning the court for ab initio marriage equality to be written into it. Let's remember, the court has held that there is a need for marriage equality. The point is, it says that it is legislative. I also want to point out, the courts have no problem interfering in legislation when it suits them. With the farm laws, they were very happy interfering with it. With Sabarimala, they were very happy interfering with it. It's just suddenly when some other communities get involved, they don't want to interfere in it. This is not the rule of law.
Right, so it's selective is what you're trying to say, Abhijit Iyer Mitra. I want to get in Ratan Sharda as well. Ratan Sharda, we are seemingly moving towards a uniform civil code, and like Abhijit Iyer Mitra also put out, then you would have no option, but it would break open the doors of what exactly is being asked for by the petitioners in this particular case. Do you think then India is ready for this?
I think what Abhijit says depends on who are the petitioners, what they do when the Uniform Civil Code comes. It will need much more push than believing that Uniform Civil Code by itself will bring in this law. See, there are four issues today that have come up. One is the legal, other is the political, third is social, and fourth is wokeism. To my mind, legally, courts gave all the good words that suit the woke crowd and to make them happy. But when it came to bite, they refused to bite because they are afraid. While they were not afraid of so many legislation where they have been, taking a very, very pervasive stance, like Abhijit pointed out, on this issue, which is a very sensitive issue, which requires society to take along, they could have taken a much more bolder step as they took in case of decriminalization, because only they are above the popular politics. Politicians are not. Secondly, as far as political stance goes, when the committee is formed, whether the committee is empowered enough. Secondly, the brief of the committee, whether it's limited only to give them the basic human right, like being companion or succession right or separation, etc., and their financial security, etc., or it is going to go further down and do something legal about it. Third is the social issue. To my mind, this LGBT issue has been totally downgraded by the folks who have added Q++, I++, which has confused the entire issue. There are genuine LGBT people who are nature's own gift, but there are people who made it into some kind of spectacle where they have gone down to the level where they're trying to make children talk about gender sensitization, where they're trying to make children change sex in minor age, where parents don't have any role to play. As we copy West, I am very fearful that this will also be copied to that level. If it goes to that level, then the real issues of the genuine LGBT community will be lost. That is happening now. People are confused that who are these weird people who are trying to, come up for these laws. I have never seen people of this type. I have met Abhijit, I have met so many other people who have been genuinely very good, wonderful people who don't go out for any exhibitionism. This is what worries me, because what happens to the family, we are not very sure when they get married. While I have been advocating decriminalization from the very idea of Indian culture, as far as this marriage is concerned, same-sex marriage is concerned, it requires much more discussion in the society.
Sure.
Times have changed and thinking has changed, but it cannot push through. It cannot be pushed down the throat of the people. As you go forward, you'll find minorities totally against it. And this government is strong enough to decriminalize it with the help of court. But when it comes to same-sex marriage, are going to face huge opposition from the conservatives, from orthodoxy, and it has to be sensitized, not through the woke communities, but to real, genuine activists of LGBT.
Sure, but Mr. Sharda, the argument that you're making, that we as a society are perhaps not ready for it and you cannot push this down somebody's throat. But this is the same argument that those who are against UCC also make. Can they then differentiate? No. You say a different push needs to be made and it depends really on who the petitioners are. But can we then differentiate that we have, as per religion is concerned, we have the same law for everyone, but then it gets selective when it's about sexual orientation or gender identity?
See, you are talking minority within minority. People who have not been recognized as genuine, or the normal human beings, that they have been criminalized, they have been ridiculed. From there, we have come to a stage where we started acceptance. So I am talking of that aspect. I am not talking of, it is similar to religious. No, it is not similar to religious equivocation. It is different because every religion has such communities. How that religion acts with that community is the issue. Hindus have been able to absorb them, treat them equally well, and they have not created the kind of criminalization that other societies did. So we have a very different approach than what West is. We cannot copy West. We have to find our own solutions. We will find our own solutions, but we need much more sanity and much more persuasive way of doing it.
Sure.
As I said, just as UCC requires persuasion, this also requires persuasion, but these are really people who have no voice. These are people whom people don't recognize, refuse to recognize, and queers have queered the pitch by the eyes, wokeism has queered their pitch further, where people look at it in a very strange, phenomena. It's not a strange phenomena. They have been around for thousands of years.
Sure. Abhijit Iyer Mitra, do you agree that some perhaps are working against the cause that you're fighting for? It's counterproductive to the cause that you're fighting for?
Absolutely. See, the problem is, Poonam, I am gay. There is nothing mentally wrong with me. The problem is I am today forcibly clubbed in with a whole crowd of mental illness called wokery, which, advocates female genital mutilation, child genital mutilation, all kinds of things in serious psychological disorders, which are now clumped with me. In Canada, now it's become two spirits. Apparently, you can be bipolar and be classified in the same category as Abhijit Iyer Mitra, homosexual. Okay, I am not bipolar. Bipolarity is different. Trans problems are different. Lesbian problems are different. Homosexual men problems are different. Bisexual problems are different. Each one of them is different. You can't go have Delhi Pride where you carry Free Palestine and Free Kashmir slogans. How did Free Kashmir and Free Palestine come into this? In Palestine and Kashmir, I'll be thrown off a rooftop. It's like chickens advocating for KFC. Have you ever seen chickens in a KFC ad saying we love KFC? No. It has become a joke. And there has been, remember when decriminalization happened, the government never opposed it. They left it to the courts and there was very significant support from the Hindu community for it. Why did everybody turn against it this particular time? I think we have to introspect. It's very easy to externalize problems, but we really need to introspect as to why this happened and why a government that was generally supportive, and even now the RSS is extremely supportive of gay marriage. The issue is one of public perception and how that public perception is turned. What has changed in these last 4 or 5 years when the public perception is turned? Why?
Sure, and now we have a committee that's going to be looking into this on the directions of the Supreme Court, but we do not have the nitty-gritties of what this committee is going to look like, what the framework is that they're going to look into, what the timeline of it is. Does that give you hope, or do you feel that this perhaps would then be shelved or pushed into cold storage because it's an uncomfortable thing to talk about for many?
Absolutely. I think a timeline should have been given, but that doesn't matter. I think any further civil push by this government, be it UCC, be it anything else, we will be intervening in the courts to tag on marriage equality in there. I think it should be that sort of a conditionality that there can be no social legislation with regards to personal law which does not tag on social equity. That will be the legal strategy as far as I'm concerned. I don't know what the other people are going to do because they clearly seem to be more interested in publicity than actually solving problems.
And we really do hope that it's not the cause that suffers at the hands of a certain few who are trying to just grab headlines like both of you have been pointing out. But on that note, I want to leave it there. I thank you both gentlemen for joining us here on this broadcast. It is disappointing, heartbreaking for some, but it's not back to square one is also what many say. On that note, we are shifting focus and ending the show, in fact, of leaving you with visuals and reactions coming in of all the stars who were felicitated today at the 69th National Awards.
Of a woman who strongly defends and takes the
I'm very grateful and very thankful and supremely honored.
And this is the year for the women, as we are saying, this is a women year of empowerment. A trend like this?
Yes, every year should be year of women empowerment.
Occasion, the first Telugu actor to have got a national award. What would you want to say?
Well, it's my honor, and it's just not my win. It's all our Telugu people's win. Thank
The
you.
way in which Telugu cinema has emerged over a period of time, whether it's Triple R or Pushpa or you as an actor, what does this mean for the industry? Because Anurag Thakur said this is the Indian film industry and not the southern or the northern film industry.
Absolutely right. It's not it's not about Telugu cinema or Tamil or Malayalam or Kannada or South or North. It's Indian cinema that's that's gaining popularity worldwide.
Sir, you brought the country a lot of honor with your voice, not only nationally but internationally, but this national award would have been extremely special.
If that award was a sumptuous lunch for me, and this would be the dessert. Both are, tasty.
A lot of people, whether it's of course the Indians or even people across the world, and I've seen even ambassadors dance to Natu Natu as well without even understanding the lyrics.
Yeah, somehow, sometimes that magic happens because music is universal. So we can't say which is going to be viral.
And the way Indian music, Indian films are reaching out to the world, Oscars have come for Triple R and of course the Elephant Whisperers amongst the others. You think India is reaching its global stage on the platform that it requires?
Of course. It needs to go more and more. It's all a beginning only.
Your music, your voice, right from Salman Khan to now is not new. This national award, what does this mean for you?
First of all, सबको बहुत 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 शुक्रिया. It means really a lot, ma'am, because I think this is the bestest and the biggest honor any Indian movie technician would dream for. So thank you so much for all the love given to the entire music and each and every song and music of Pushpa. So I'm really honored to be winning the best music director for Pushpa.
We have huge fans of Pushpa in our country as well. Do you want to say a couple of lines for them?
I only need to thank everyone for giving us so much of heart and love. And तेरी झलक शर्फी श्रीवल्ली नैना मदक बर्फी तेरी झलक शर्फी श्रीवल्ली बातें कर दो हरफी.
And I have no idea what the government is planning. I do know one thing, that the mayor of the city is already planning ahead, and they understand that in order for us to be able to recover, the minute the military operation ends, we have to be prepared for our people. And we're going to do anything and everything that we need to in order to do that. So we're raising funds right now to be able to rebuild our homes. There's so many homes that have been hit, about 74 direct hits into people's homes. Some people have nowhere to go back to, right? So we're going to be able to rebuild it. We're going to be able to give them what they need when it comes to mental health professionals that are in town, anything and everything. And right now they're getting ready for that. So the minute we'll know that the operation or the war is over, then we can start with the recovery piece.
A few days.
We don't know. I think everybody's kind of preparing us for at least a month. Yeah.
So, thank you, Eric, for talking
Thank you
to
very
us.
much.
And it may take probably few months before situation would go back to normal. And situation has been pretty bad. We have seen all around the city, the blood-soaked streets, houses, they have been left like that, cars burned. Behind me, you could see there was a police station that used to be here. And what is left of this police station is all that a small puddle of water and rubbles. Those were removed from the site, just days before. Now the entire city, it looks ghostly. The cars that were attacked and they were actually, totally damaged. People at home shot dead. It was a day of rest. People are not very hopeful about how soon the normalcy will return in the city, but they do hope that probably it will take few weeks or few months before the situation could be as safe and secure that people who have fled from the city would be returning back to their home. Meanwhile, the entire city and the perimeter of the city has been taken over by the Israeli Defense Forces, tanks, artilleries being fired, Israeli jets also flying over Gaza and dropping ammunition or missiles targeting Hamas locations. 2,400 or more than that people in Palestine, in Gaza, they have also been killed. swiftly shifting towards the humanitarian crisis that is emerging in the Gaza Strip because of the number of casualties that has been going on there, humanitarian crisis that has emerged, food supplies shortage, medical supplies shortage, doctors having been killed, children having been killed. So the gory images of Israeli tragedy, and that is where the balance of geopolitics remains. We'll have to see whether the Israeli offensive will continue on the Gaza Strip or the diplomacy will take center stage, and there will. We are in Zeroth, and this was the place which was worst hit during the 7th October terrorist attack by Hamas people. We are joined by Edith, and she will explain the kind of situation that is currently in city. Okay, so first to just give you some idea, we are still standing on the splattered blood remains, and this is a safe house that was probably also attacked, and many people were dragged out of this house and killed summarily. So Edith, how would you describe the situation in the city currently?
So right now we have
Good evening, hello and welcome. You're watching Brass Tacks. I'm Anusha Soni. The Supreme Court bench led by Chief Justice of India, Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, refused to recognize marriage as a fundamental right. The court also refused to hold provisions of the Special Marriage Act as void or illegal for failing to include the same-sex couples. The bench agreed that words cannot be read into the provisions of the Special Marriage Act for it to include same-sex couples. The Apex Court bench believes that any reading of words into the present laws like Special Marriage Act would tantamount to incursions into the legislative domain. It is the sheer legal impossibility of the idea that has deterred the Supreme Court from crossing that Lakshman Rekha. While the court went on to assert the need for the state to form a committee and to look into the concerns of the community and the need to protect the LGBTQIA community from any kind of harassment, the bench was clearly of the opinion that the legal ground is not fertile